What if the life you've poured yourself into, the relationships, the status, the identity you've worn like armor, was never truly yours to begin with? Imagine climbing a mountain for decades, battling storms of expectation, enduring the silent weight of inherited beliefs, only to stand at what you thought was the summit and realize it's the wrong peak. The air up here is thinner, not fresher. The view isn't glorious, but disorienting. A quiet panic rises as the realization dawns. The path you took was never yours. It was paved by voices louder than your own. Childhood conditioning, social scripts, cultural definitions of success, they sculpted a version of you designed to belong, not to awaken. And now, mid-climb, the mask begins to slip. Your smile trembles. Your achievements feel like a stranger's clothes. Then comes the whisper, soft, haunting, undeniable. This isn't me. You shake it off, but it returns, cutting deeper, asking the question that splits open everything. Then who am I? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who ventured into the unseen territories of the human psyche, once said that the first 40 years of life are not lived, they are rehearsed. He called them a necessary illusion, a preparation for the real journey that begins in the second half of life. It's a confronting idea, especially in a world that glorifies the first half with applause for careers, marriages, and milestones, yet treats midlife as decline. But what if midlife isn't the end, it's the doorway? What if everything before now was a performance, and the second half is the moment the curtain rises for who you truly are? Perhaps society avoids this truth not because it's bleak, but because it's too bright. Because the second half threatens to dismantle the scaffolding of ego, title, and image. And in that dismantling, you might find a freedom so profound it makes your earlier victories feel like shadows. The lie wasn't that you failed. The lie was that your life's meaning could be found in the script handed to you. And now, you are being invited to write your own. There comes a moment in every life when the structure you spent decades building begins to tremble, not from failure, but from truth. Jung taught that the first half of life is an apprenticeship in adaptation. We learn to fit in. We mimic what earns approval. We become what our parents hoped for, what school shaped, and what society rewarded. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, we construct the persona, a mask polished so well that we forget it was ever a mask at all. But eventually, the day arrives when it no longer sits comfortably on the face of your soul. The applause that once sustained you grows faint. The roles you performed begin to feel scripted, and in the quiet, when it is just you and the echo of your own breath, something inside you stirs. Have you felt it? That soft but persistent unease, as if the life that once felt solid now rings slightly hollow. You may look around and realize you have everything you believed you needed, yet something essential remains untouched. No achievement fills it, no relationship dissolves it, no external success soothes it. Jung would say this ache is not a flaw, it is the soul knocking. Not timidly, but with increasing urgency, insisting that you turn inward. It is the first signal that the real journey is beginning, a journey not of adding to yourself, but of stripping away everything that was never truly yours. This transition often masquerades as restlessness or dissatisfaction. It might appear as a longing you cannot name, a quiet crisis that unsettles the foundation you once trusted. The second half of life demands a courage far greater than the first. It asks you to dismantle the identity you spent years constructing and to enter the wilderness of your own psyche without a map. It asks you to walk toward the raw, ancient, untouched parts of yourself that have waited patiently beneath the persona. So what if the so-called midlife crisis is not a collapse, but a calling? What if the disillusionment, the confusion, and the pain you've endured were not punishments, but preparations? As the old structures crack, as familiar joys lose their flavor, as the reflection in the mirror feels more like a stranger than a friend, something sacred is happening. You are standing at the threshold of individuation, the process of becoming whole. And now the question rises quietly but powerfully. If everything before this moment has been rehearsal, are you willing to hear the real symphony of your life begin? From the very beginning, your soul was handed a script it did not write. Before you could even speak your first word, your name was chosen, your gender assigned, and slowly the architecture of who you were supposed to be began to take shape. Into your tender, unformed psyche were pressed the fingerprints of others, parents, teachers, peers, society, each imprint shaping your behavior, your worth, your very sense of being. You learned quickly. Smile when praised, dim your light when shamed. Adaptation became survival. Approval became oxygen. But beneath this early shaping, something sacred was quietly buried. What emerged on the surface was not the full truth of who you are, but a carefully curated image, a persona. Jung named it for what it was, the mask we wear to meet the demands of the outer world. It is not evil. It is not a lie. It is a necessary garment to navigate the complex theater of life. Without it, we would be vulnerable to chaos, misunderstood and exposed. But with it, the danger is forgetting that it is merely a garment. The tragedy begins when the mask becomes your face, when the survival strategy becomes your identity, when the role you play substitutes for the soul you carry, and year by year, decade by decade, it weighs heavier. That exhaustion you feel isn't just aging, it's the spiritual fatigue of living a life estranged from your essence. Why does this happen to nearly everyone? Because we were all born into a collective dream that prefers order over authenticity, obedience over inner truth. Nietzsche warned us of this long ago. He called it herd morality, a societal hypnosis disguised as virtue. We are taught what to value: success, control, appearance, while quietly being trained to betray our inner voice. Even rebellion is marketed to us, prepackaged in trends, so we confuse noise for meaning, performance for purpose. And when the world finally stops clapping, when the spotlight dims, and all that's left is silence, that silence is not a void, it is not a failure, it is the sacred threshold of the unconscious calling you home. Jung understood this as the turning point, the moment when you no longer chase the world, but begin the deeper work of remembering yourself. Let this silence not be feared, but honored. It is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your return. The first half of life is like the rising sun, radiant, assertive, reaching outward to conquer the world. It is the ego's domain, where we build careers, relationships, and identities shaped by society's expectations. We chase validation, achievement, and belonging, believing that our worth is measured by external success. But at midlife, something ancient within us begins to stir. The outward climb gives way to an inward pull. Like the moon rising after sunset, the second half of life calls us into softer, darker terrain, not to destroy us, but to guide us home. And yet, the modern world has forgotten this sacred descent. We idolize youth as if age were a curse. We crave beginnings, yet dread the necessary endings. So, when the psyche begins to unravel what no longer serves us, when roles feel empty, when success no longer satisfies, we call it a crisis. We diagnose it as failure, but Jung saw something deeper. The soul, long silenced, is reclaiming its voice. This is not a breakdown, it is a breakthrough. He called it individuation, not a surface-level makeover, but a profound confrontation with everything we've buried. The mask, or persona, begins to slip. The roles we've played so dutifully no longer fit, and the psyche, exhausted by pretending, begins to rebel. This rebellion shows up not as destruction, but as sacred disturbance. In our dreams, our anxiety, our discontent, these are not enemies, they are invitations. Jung believed that beneath the ego lies a deeper self, encoded with symbols, stories, and archetypes. This is the soul's blueprint, waiting patiently beneath the noise of conditioning. But to retrieve it, we must descend into the shadow, into the forgotten child, into the silenced rage and the unlived dreams. Not to shame these parts, but to welcome them back into the whole. This midlife turning point is not accidental. Viktor Frankl once wrote that man's deepest drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning, and meaning is often born through suffering. When life begins to feel less about more and more about why, when distractions lose their shimmer, when mortality becomes real, we begin to ask the only question that matters. Who was I before I became what the world wanted me to be? And am I still willing to meet that self again? This is not a crisis. It is a rite of passage, and your soul has been waiting for it all along. There comes a moment, often unnoticed by the world, when a subtle fracture appears within. You wake up, and everything looks unchanged. Your home, your job, your reflection. But something sacred inside you has begun to shift. What once felt purposeful now feels performative. You wear the same clothes, speak the same words, but none of it seems to fit anymore. Your laughter echoes like a memory. Your eyes reflect someone you no longer recognize. It begins softly, a quiet sigh, a fleeting hesitation, but it grows louder in silence. You tell yourself it's just exhaustion, yet the discomfort lingers like a soul whispering from behind the mask. The life you so carefully constructed begins to feel less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated cage, not because it has failed you, but because you have begun to outgrow it. And still, you find yourself unable to explain it. Everything appears stable on the surface, but beneath it, something ancient stirs. This is not chaos. This is not a collapse. This is the soul awakening, and when the soul awakens, it does not shout. It peels away the false, the fabricated, the familiar, quietly, invisibly, and in a world obsessed with appearances, this kind of inner death is easily mistaken for a phase, a bad mood, or burnout. So you try to silence it. You overwork, overthink, overperform. You cling to the old strategies like lifeboats, but they no longer save you. They suffocate you, because what is breaking is not the world, but the identity you've worn for decades. The self you forged to survive is now too small to contain the truth trying to emerge. The more you resist this shedding, the deeper your suffering becomes. Jung once warned that the unconscious, when ignored, does not vanish. It governs your life from the shadows, and you mistake it for fate. This is that moment, not a dramatic collapse, but a sacred undoing. The shadow emerges not as a threat, but as a guide. Everything unhealed comes to the surface, not to haunt you, but to free you. Yet freedom has a price, the unraveling of the familiar. And in a culture that values productivity over presence, the soul's descent is seen as regression, not rebirth. But the soul doesn't evolve in straight lines. It spirals, deepens, descends before it rises. And if you refuse that descent, you deny the very wisdom that could restore you. This quiet crisis is not your undoing, it is your becoming, but only if you are willing to listen. There comes a moment when the familiar no longer feels like home. You return to the structures of your past, the job, the habits, the relationships, but something essential inside you resists. Outwardly, everything still works. You wake up, perform your duties, and wear the roles you've always worn. But inwardly, it's as if you're dressed in someone else's skin. The conversations that once animated you now echo hollow, like voices in an abandoned hall. The victories you used to chase now taste like ashes. There is a silence beneath the noise, and in that silence, an unsettling truth begins to emerge. What if the life you built wasn't truly yours? Not because you failed, but because you were asleep. Like most, you followed the script handed down to you, written by well-meaning parents, systems of reward and punishment, cultures that feared your fullness. You lived the life expected, not chosen, and now, as consciousness stirs, you see the scaffolding behind the scenery. The dreams you chased were never yours. The worth you measured came from someone else's ruler. This is the disorientation of awakening. To realize the foundation beneath your identity was borrowed, shaped by survival, not sovereignty. The illusions that were once comforting now unravel. You scroll through curated lives on a screen and feel nothing. You hear the familiar promises of success and feel no pulse. You walk through the world, and it no longer holds its spell, not because you've risen above it, but because you've pierced through it. The veil has lifted, the persona is cracking, the unconscious contracts of belonging, be liked, stay small, don't upset, are now exposed. And here, the deeper transformation begins. You don't just grieve the mask, you grieve the years lived behind it. The laughter that wasn't real, the silence that wasn't peace, the relationships that were more performance than presence. But the grief is sacred. It's proof that you are finally feeling. Beneath the anesthesia of adaptation, your soul has been whispering, and now it roars. The ache in your chest, the tension in your breath, the quiet despair that wakes you at 3 a.m., these are not symptoms to suppress. They are signals. Your inner world is demanding resurrection. You are not broken. You are being summoned. This is the hour of reckoning, not a crisis, but a crossing. Not a breakdown, but a return. And the question is no longer, how do I fix my life, but how do I finally live the one that is mine? There comes a point when distraction becomes its own form of denial. You may drown in the noise of productivity, books, podcasts, and promotions, all in the name of growth. You may chase the next achievement with a sense of urgency, hoping that doing more will quiet the silent ache within. But the soul does not speak the language of accomplishments. It does not measure your worth in progress. It waits patiently for truth, not in your victories, but in your vulnerability. And when the world grows quiet in the stillness you avoid, it begins to stir. That ache you feel is not a flaw. It is the echo of a deeper knowing, the space between the identity you've performed and the self you've abandoned. This is the paradox of modern life, surrounded by knowledge, yet starved of meaning. With endless access to information, we scroll through insights, but rarely embody wisdom. We simulate connection while forgetting how to commune with ourselves. Because no one taught us to listen, not just outwardly, but inwardly. Beneath the noise, another voice waits. A language not made of logic, but of symbols, dreams, and buried longings. It is the language of the unconscious, the place Jung devoted his life to exploring, yet it is the very realm we've been taught to dismiss. Inside this neglected world lies everything we were told to suppress: the wild, the tender, the misunderstood, the child who cried too easily, the artist who colored outside the lines, the lover who felt too deeply. We silenced them to fit in, believing we were choosing safety. But in that silence, we also buried our aliveness. The unconscious never forgets. It bleeds through our anxiety, our addictions, our discontent, the subtle rebellion of a soul denied. To Jung, this fragmentation is the real suffering, not failure, but forgetting. Forgetting who we are beneath the roles we inherited. Healing begins not with doing, but with becoming. Not chasing another version of success, but integrating the self that has been waiting in the shadows. Individuation, as Jung called it, is not a task. It is a sacred return. And that return begins when the persona fractures, when the mask no longer holds. What we call a breakdown is often the breakthrough, the soul refusing to play small. The moment we stop asking how to succeed and begin asking how to become whole, there comes a moment in every life when the mirror stops reflecting a person and begins echoing a question. You stand before your own image, but something doesn't feel right. The eyes staring back carry no spark, no familiarity. You're not looking at a soul. You're watching a performance rehearsed so long it forgot its own script. The smile feels distant. The rhythm of your life feels mechanical. There is a hollowness beneath your skin, but no clear name for the ache. So you keep moving. You keep performing. You wear the mask because it once kept you safe. But there's a day when even safety begins to suffocate. And then it hits, gently at first, like a whisper, a quiet restlessness, a strange nostalgia for something you cannot name. You feel pulled, not forward but inward toward a deeper, older truth buried beneath years of noise. That pull is not random. It is your soul knocking from within, asking if you're ready to listen. But listening comes at a cost. It asks you to burn the scripts you've memorized, to step out of the costume, to surrender the neat identity you've spent decades curating, not to lose yourself, but to meet the self that never left. This is not punishment. It is purification. The unraveling is sacred. It peels away what is false so that what is real can breathe. And what rises from the ashes is not a shinier version of you. It is the wild, unedited self that existed before the world told you who to be. The one who still remembers why you came here. That self is not a stranger. That self is home. But to reach it, you must cross a threshold not into crisis, but into clarity. You must descend, not to collapse, but to remember. Because everything you seek, your peace, your power, your purpose, was never lost. It was only hidden, waiting beneath the layers, waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to listen, waiting for you to wake up, not into someone new, but into the one you've always been. There comes a turning point when you are no longer merely reacting to life, but allowing life to move through you like a sacred current. You are no longer the victim of circumstance, but the vessel of presence. The compulsion to control begins to melt. The terror of uncertainty loosens its grip. Why? Because something deeper has awakened, an inner compass not forged by logic or the need for approval, but born from resonance. You begin to follow what feels aligned, not what looks acceptable. The quiet yes that echoes through your chest becomes louder than any external voice. It is not noise, it is known. It is the sacred vibration of truth moving through your bones. And in this space, you no longer rush. You flow. You create not to be seen, but to see yourself more clearly. You love not to fill a void, but to expand the capacity of your soul. The path you walk is not easier, but it is real. Life does not offer perfection, but meaning. You begin to understand that every heartbreak is not a failure, but a portal. Every ending is not a collapse, but an invitation. Even death itself softens, not as a punishment, but as a return to something eternal. Because what is truly tragic is not the end of life. It is never having truly lived. Lived with your heart unmasked. Lived with your soul at the center, no longer exiled to the sidelines. And now that you've remembered, you can't unknow it. You don't go back, not out of pride, but because the old skin no longer fits. That chapter served you. It protected you. But it was never meant to contain you forever. Now begins the real journey, not away from life, but deeper into it, with eyes that see, a heart that feels, and a soul that no longer hides. You stop searching for the beginning because you realize you are the beginning. Every breath forward is not a pursuit of worth, but an embodiment of it. You're no longer waiting for permission. You've reclaimed the authority of your own existence. And everything you once feared, solitude, uncertainty, change, becomes your greatest teacher. Perhaps the most sacred paradox is this: the more you release the performance, the closer you come to the person you were always meant to be. There is no destination, only a deepening, a descent into presence so profound that you finally understand. Purpose was never something to find. It was something to live, not loudly but truthfully, not perfectly but wholly. Maybe your purpose is your art, or your stillness, or how you hold someone's hand without needing to fix their pain. That is your quiet revolution. And even if the world doesn't understand, you do. Because you're no longer here to be understood. You are here to embody the mystery you once feared, to stop trying to be someone and instead to finally be alive, fully, unapologetically, awake. Because the only real success is not status, but soul alignment. The only true wealth is not accumulation, but presence. And the only power that endures is not control, but authenticity. Once you touch this truth, the noise of the world fades into the background. You begin to see what was always there, but hidden in plain sight, the sacred wrapped in the mundane, the divine humming quietly through your imperfections. You no longer betray your instincts for applause. You begin to trust the ancient rhythms of your body, the mysterious language of your dreams, and the silence that reveals more than words ever could. You stop handing your power to systems, doctrines, or personas. Instead, you listen inward, and in that listening, you finally return. Not to a place, not to a person, but to a state of being that was never truly lost. Because home is not external. Home is the self without the mask, the soul unburdened by performance, the truth that needs no validation. It is you that exists beneath expectation, beneath the noise, steady and whole. And once you have remembered that version of yourself, you carry it, not as a banner, but as a quiet force, into every room, every conversation, every breath. You don't speak it, you radiate it, and that presence becomes the message. So if you've spent your first 40 years becoming what the world applauded, let it be known. It was not wasted. It was an initiation. It was compost for the seed of who you truly are. And now, that seed doesn't bloom by striving. It breaks open by ripeness. The season has come. The voice of your soul, once buried beneath busyness, now pulses in your bones. You are not broken. You are becoming whole. You are not behind. You are in motion. You are not late. You are right on time. And this fierce, calm, embodied knowing is what the second half of life is for. Not another chase, not more masks, but integration, wholeness, peace. The world is not starving for perfection. It is starving for what is real. And you, in this very moment, are the threshold. Not of collapse, but of return. Not to the version of you that others shaped, but to the truth that was always quietly waiting beneath. Beneath fear, beneath striving, beneath noise. So take this breath. Feel it settle in your chest. You are here, you are real, and that has always been enough. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.